nice to see you all again. We hope you're well. We hope you've been safe, busy, not bored, found lots of fun things to do, got some work done. Rusty and I have found lots to do. We've been playing different games every day and having such fun. And today we've been playing superheroes. I was Wonder Woman and Rusty was Spider-Dog. We've been running around having lots of adventures, haven't we? Anyway, now it's time to settle down, relax and have a story. And this week, we've got the Topsy-Turvies. I don't know if you know what topsy-turvy means. It means everything's the wrong way round from what it should be. So this should be interesting. Relax, settle down, and here we go. The Topsy-Turvies. The Topsy-Turvies always got up at midnight. They put on their pyjamas. Then they went upstairs and had dinner. "Eat up, Minx," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Minx juggled with the sausages. "Clever girl," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. "Jinx, stop eating with your fork," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. "You know that's for combing your hair. Please use your fingers and toes." "Could you pass the jam, please, Minx?" said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Minx dipped her fingers in the jar and hurled the jam at her father. "Thanks," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. "Could you pass the whipped cream, please, Jinx?" said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Jinx flung a handful of cream at his mother. "Thanks, dear," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Then it was time for school. After school, they went to the park. Then they played beautiful music together and watched TV. And afterwards they ate breakfast. Then it was bath time. And then they all went to bed. How strange. Every night and day at the Topsy-Turvies was exactly the same. Until I'm going to sleep on the table in the kitchen. One afternoon, a loud knocking at the door woke them up. "Oh, who could be up at this time of day?" yawned Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. It was their neighbour, Mrs. Plum. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Plum. "Were you just leaving?" "No," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. "Why would I go outside wearing my coat?" "OK, I'm sorry to bother you," said Mrs. Plum, "but I have to go out. Could you look after little Lucy? She's as good as gold." Mrs. Topsy-Turvy was very sleepy, but she liked helping others. "Of course," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. "We'll be undressed in a minute." As soon as everyone was ready, they went next door to Mrs. Plum's house. "Oh, thank you so much," said Mrs. Plum. "Do you make yourselves at home and have something to eat?" And off she went. "Mum, why is Mrs. Plum wearing clothes outside?" asked Minx. "Shh," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. "Everyone's different." The Topsy-Turvies goggled at Mrs. Plum's house. Nothing looked right. "Oh, poor Mrs. Plum," said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. "Let's make the house lovely for her." The Topsy-Turvies went to work. They fixed and they fussed and they put the room in apple pie order. Oh, that's better, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Careful, Lucy. Don't put that apron on. You'll get paint all over it, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Lucy, don't draw on the paper. Draw on the walls, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Isn't she naughty, said Minx. Well, not everyone can be as well behaved as you, dear, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Lucy, what a lovely picture. I'm hungry, said Jinx. So am I, said Minx. Mrs. Topsy-Turvy looked at the clock. It was almost 5. Oh, we might as well have breakfast then, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Let's see what food we can find in the bedroom. It took them a very long time to find where Mrs. Plum kept her food. What an odd house, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. How funny to eat in the kitchen, said Minx. Breakfast is under the table, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Don't forget to wash your feet. What's for dessert? Said Minx. Tomatoes, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Yippee, said Jinx. But no tomatoes until you finish your cake. Oh, do I have to eat all my cake? Said Jinx. Yes, you do, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Suddenly there was a noise at the window. It was a burglar. Hooray, we've got a visitor, shouted Minx. And he's coming through the window, shouted Jinx. Let's make everything lovely for our guest, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Please have something to eat, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy, throwing tomatoes at the burglar. The burglar looked unhappy. Have some cake, said Jinx, hurling his leftovers. No, have some of mine, shouted Minx. Mine too, shouted Lucy. The frightened burglar escaped as fast as he could. Why did he run off? Said Minx. I don't know, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. Then Mrs. Plum ran in. Is everything all right? She said, Mrs. Plum. I just saw a burglar jumping out of the window. Everything's fine, said Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Oh, you chased away a burglar, said Mrs. Plum. Thank you so much. Goodness, what a mess he's made. What mess? Asked Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. The Topsy-Turvies waved goodbye and went home. Mrs. Plum should have said thank you for making her house so lovely, said Minx. Never mind, said Mrs. Topsy-Turvy. It takes all sorts to make a world. The end. Well, that was a funny story, wasn't it? Rusty's nearly asleep. I don't think I'd like to live in a world like that. That would be a bit too confusing for me, I think. But it was quite fun to read, wasn't it? Anyway, Rusty and I are going to go off and have another game. So you guys keep yourselves safe and busy. Do lots of work, but have lots of fun at the same time, okay? And we'll see you next week for another story. Take care.